Good morning and good evening to all of you who are joining us from different parts of the world. I am Divya Rajgopal and I'm glad to welcome all of you today for our next webinar under the webinar series on the front lines curated by the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, India Research Center and Project Sanchar. To give you a brief background about the India Research Center, it is the first global center of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Established in 2015, the center has three strategic goals of research, teaching, and translation of evidence into policies and programs. The center provides a platform to facilitate faculty exchange and partnership between public health researchers and Harvard Chan faculty. The center is led by Professor K. Vishwanath, Lee Kuki, Professor of Health Communications at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Project Sanchar, or Science and News Communicating Health and Research, is aimed at building the capacity of journalists to draw on the latest science and data for shaping public knowledge, attitudes, and policy on health. And today, we are glad to bring forth an interactive session focused on the response of the not-for-profit sector to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we are honored to have an eminent list of panelists joining us today. Let me make a quick introduction of our panelists. We are joined by HSD Srinivas, Head Health, Tata Trust, Mr. Aditya Natraj, Director, Piramal Foundation for Education Leadership, Mr. Gaurav Arora, Vice President, Project Skills in Sports, Salam Bombay Foundation, and Ms. Preeti Kibe, Forbes Marshall Foundation. Just to brief our audience about today's seminar, our panelists will be presenting their slides. It will be a 10-minute presentation from each of the panelists, and then we will be taking the question and answers. So let me begin by introducing our first panelist, HSD Srinivas. Mr. Srinivas leads and manages public health initiatives at the Tata Trust for the last 4 years. Prior to that, he led Reliance Foundation's community health initiatives. He also was the Human Resource Officer at the L.V. Prasad Eye Institute in Hyderabad and Chief Operating Officer at EMRI Hyderabad. So Mr. Srinivas, the floor is yours. Take us through on how Tata Trust has worked towards several initiatives during this pandemic.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening and good morning. It's a pleasure to be here on this panel. Tata Trust has been one of the foremost philanthropic agencies in the country, as we know. One of the very first to announce substantial support along with the group when the pandemic came about, or when we knew that we were heading into this. There was a lot of top level involvement besides just the monetary contribution. A lot of managerial interventions were there, and 4 work streams were chalked out. The first one was about creating mass awareness, and we reached out to almost 2 crore individuals through their mobiles and mass media about the behaviors that need to be exhibited. Second was in terms of equipping hospitals and building new hospital infrastructure. The third one was in terms of procuring the PPE and distributing it across the country. That became the largest exercise. The fourth was actually developing the health workforce of the country to look for, to equip them to handle the pandemic. I would be talking mostly about what we did in terms of building the people capabilities, the thinking that went behind in developing this program. So we realized that while the measures for lockdown were giving us some space, breathing space, the big thing is yet to hit us. So we looked at the government plan to actually develop health workforce which was not exposed to this kind of a pandemic earlier, at least in their lifetimes. So we needed to quickly reskill, upskill some of the existing workforce. And next slide, please. We went looking at the kind of partners who would be able to help us doing this, and we zeroed in on two partners. Care Institute of Health Sciences from Hyderabad, led by Professor Somraju, who's got, they manage chain of hospitals and equip thousands of doctors and nurses. And then the second one was Christian Medical College, Vellore, more than 100-year-old academic institution, very well respected for their research and cutting edge processes. So having got both the partners on board, can we have the next slide, please? We looked at identifying the kind of training content. One major issue was that while medical training so far everywhere has been a very physical touch and feel kind of a thing, we had to really quickly adapt this particular training to virtual mode. So we looked at the kind of competencies that are required for not just the doctors or a nurse, but the entire team that would be managing right from a patient coming into the hospital all the way to the triaging, and then those requiring advanced care in the ICUs. So we looked at about 54 different types of competencies that can be bucketed under 7 or 8 major heads. And our aim was that it is not just going to be a one-off kind of a session, but more giving the basics, so that the first was that we needed to protect our health workforce. So they needed to know how to take care of themselves and be safe. And then, of course, we also wanted that they take care of the patients doing the adequate thing. So can we have the next slide, please? So we came out with this approach. CMC Vellore was tasked as befits an academic organization like them. They were requested to develop master trainers, and therefore these master trainers subsequently would be able to develop the cadre within the hospital. So these are the, whereas the Care Institute was geared up more towards delivering webinars for larger audience who would sit through the classes and then, subsequently follow up. Both had a lot of content that was getting generated, and it was getting updated quite regularly. As far as I remember, once we started at the end of April, these kind of sessions, guidelines kept changing and or getting added to, and then new knowledge was added. Luckily for us, both the institutes lived up to their billing, in the sense, they actually brought the most modern thinking to the practice, to the training. And there was a lot of hand-holding. Can we have the next slide, please? So there were a lot of hand-holding of the doctors and nurses getting equipped to handle the newer aspects of the pandemic. So while the online faculty development program produced close to about 500 master trainers now, each of them is capable of again training up another 5 to 10 people within their own organizations, and if required in the organizations next to them. So the support from the mother institutions continues even now, as and when any new guideline gets changed. This is being shared with all the trainees. So can I have the next slide, please? So far, we have had about close to 1,500 hospitals across 26 states, and close to about 7,500 participants, almost in the ratio of 1:3, 1 doctor and 3 nurses or paramedics have got trained so far. And they are mostly, again, the government hospitals which got benefited, and as you would see, can I have the next slide, please? As you could see, it's the swathe across the country, starting from Karnataka, Maharashtra, Telangana, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar. These are basically the states which contributed large number of hospitals and participants who got trained. And it was initially, we just needed some sort of a push. We just went and checked out with some of the hospitals whether they would want. But later on, it became a huge pull demand. So much so that we had a few international participants too, coming from the CMC affiliated hospitals. We still have about 1,500 more participants ready to go for training. So we were looking at actually equipping about 10,000 in the country. We should be finishing this kind of a training in the next month or two, reaching the numbers. Can I have the next slide, please? So the feedback has been consistently good from the participants on a -2 to 2 rating for CMC. They have consistently scored around 1.65 to 1.7. And on CIHS, more than 99% have rated the course as either excellent or good. Similarly, from the hospital administrators, I would say that almost all 100% of them agreed that they would recommend this program for others. So to that extent, it's brought a lot of value to the participants and the participating hospitals. Can we have the last one, please? And yeah, so we have some of these testimonials from the trainees who felt otherwise quite lost, that without a structured program, they were not really getting, they were sort of semi-equipped to handle this. Whereas post this training, most of them felt confident enough to take care of themselves and the patients and the hospital and the communities. So overall, it's been a very enriching experience for us, enabling this happen. Our partners, both CMC Vellore and Care Institute, have done a tremendous job trying to first compress the entire learning into virtual modules, especially when the lockdown was at its peak. So getting the right people to create the content and put them on the virtual platforms, and with the sense of urgency that was really required to match, I think both rose up to the challenge and have done a tremendous job. My thanks to both the institutions which have partnered with us. So also all the state governments which have enabled their nurses to and doctors to take part in this. This has been a slightly elaborate program. Between 14 hours to 26 hours of learning was required. And this was not a one-off 1 hour kind of webinars a lot of other institutions gave. So we kind of wanted that quality to be maintained, and we are happy it came up to that. Thank you so much for this opportunity to present our experience over here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Srinivas, for this presentation. I think one fact which I also picked up during my reporting of COVID-19 was that the states which sort of prepared their healthcare staff better were able to tackle the pandemic also better. And I think one of the biggest puzzle in this whole thing was that how the healthcare workers were trained to take on something which was absolutely unknown almost 8 months back. So there are a lot of questions that's already coming your way, but we will hold on to it once we finish the other presentation. So now I want to introduce our next presenter and panelist, Mr. Aditya Natraj. Mr. Natraj is the director of the Piramal Foundation for Education Leadership. His areas of expertise include not-for-profit management, public education reform, and youth leadership development. He holds 8 years of experience in accounting, consulting, corporate finance, and business development, and over 10 years experience in education reform in India. Mr. Natraj has a master's in business administration degree from INSEAD. Mr. Natraj, the floor is yours. Please take us through about your initiatives during the pandemic.
Thank you, Divya, and good morning to the entire audience. Good evening to everyone dialing in from India. Thank you for this opportunity to share what we have done as Piramal Foundation. First of all, kudos to you, Srinivas, for what you've done from the Tata Trust point of view. I'm glad that we all sort of complementing each other, because our approach, we didn't work with the hospitals itself. Like Srinivas said, each of us picked, I think, an area to focus on. And the area we focused on was on elderly and senior citizens. We ran a campaign across 100 districts in the country called Surakshit Dada Dadi Nana Nani Abhiyan. And next, please. The key in this was, I mean, like most people know, 50% of the final deaths across the world are from people above the age of 60. So although the infection rates are much smaller, because of the comorbidities, the chance of your death is much, much greater. So our point was, how do you do behavior change within that group? Even within India, the numbers are very similar. It fluctuates between 48 and 52%, depending on which month you're looking at. So in order to, not only did we work on the senior citizens, we also focused on the worst districts in the country. There are 112 districts which are called aspirational districts across 27 states. These are the ones with the lowest human development indicators. So the access to public health in these districts is much lower. So we ran a massive campaign along with several other NGOs and with the Niti Aayog, in partnership with Niti Aayog, in partnership with the district collector's office, started off with jingles and just awareness levels, but basically to mobilize a large number of volunteers whom we call Apne Sathi. These were young people who are giving in their time. They didn't have to go out to the communities, but they were responsible for accessing and supporting 100 old people each, 100 senior citizens each. So you volunteered your time over weekends, during the week, whenever you could, to have a conversation with these senior citizens to make sure that things were okay with them. And this was also tied up with the district administration in every district to ensure that any problem that the senior citizens had, you also had the district administration immediately responding to that. So the idea was a very targeted intervention for that. There were three basic pillars on which the campaign worked. The first is prevent. The first job of every Apna Sathi was to ensure prevention. So driving the behavior change. You have to remember that, you know, in Bombay and Delhi, we have a lot of news about what we should and should not do. But what does washing your hands mean when you're in Jaisalmer? There is no running water in 80% of villages. So washing hands, you know, all the videos show you wash at the back, wash in front. But washing hands, typically people do with mud. There is no soap. There is no running water. So what do you do in such a situation? We have an example of Richa Jalan, who was a volunteer who reached out to Govind Dubey ji and came to know that he was washing, you know, what are his washing practices and how do you change it? So very micro level intervention to change each individual senior citizen. The second pillar was about access. This was about ensuring essential services, whether it was ration, whether it was medicines. Remember that when the lockdown was on, now we've come out from the lockdown, but during the lockdown, even to get your own medicines for diabetes, if you didn't get, you were then going to die for a different reason. If you didn't get your insulin, because the shops were closed and in a village, you had to go to the closest town to get your medicine. So how are we going to make sure that every person had the medicine that were required? If you're a hypertension patient, any sort of problem that you had for that, for food, to make sure that you had the necessary food that you needed, this was very, very critical. So to just make sure that the essential services were reaching these senior citizens. And the third part was on the detect. So in case there was any chance, early detection, in case there was any chance of any fever, any chance of this, the first priority would be given to a senior citizen because the chance of morbidity was the greatest in this group. So we have example from Bara in Rajasthan where, you know, as soon as the fever was there, at least, you know, otherwise you think, oh, it's just a viral and Dadaji ko just viral hai. You don't have the information that's required. So quickly to make sure that Dadaji got access to virtual counseling from the local public health center or from the district hospital to make sure that, okay, is it only that or was it more serious than that? So these were the three pillars. The key thing in this model, next please. The key thing in this model is that there were four different, this wasn't just run by us and it is really a large collaborative. The first thing is the 112 collectors or the magistrates involved. So we partnered with Niti Aayog and sent a note out to all these collectors saying, so first we started it in one district. Sorry, just one moment, please. Yeah, we started it in only one district, and we tried it. We saw how to mobilize the Sathis, how to train the Sathis. We have a test to make sure that only if you get 80% marks, then can you go out and access the senior citizens. We got data from the pension department and all about who are the senior citizens, what are their mobile phone numbers, what are the numbers of them. Then we allocated those to the Sathis. So we needed nodal officers within each collectorate office who would be the person running this campaign, who would get the details from multiple social welfare, social justice, pension departments, whatever departments was possible to get the numbers, and then to coordinate with a mother NGO. So each district had one main NGO who was responsible for actually doing this work, mobilizing the volunteers, making sure they were trained, making sure that the work was going on, making sure the data collection was happening, and keeping in touch with the collector's office. And then you actually had the Apne Sathi itself, was the actual volunteers. So across the districts, we had about 1.4 lakh volunteers in the last 150 days. Each of these is trained to then go out and access 100 senior citizens each and make sure you're in touch. So basically, I mean, if you just think of yourself as an old dadima, your son is in Bombay and working somewhere in Bombay, you are alone in your village in Rajasthan, you don't know what to do, you don't know when he's coming back. Even the sheer emotional connection that you got from connecting to someone who was an Apne Sathi who said, Dadima, aap theek ho ki nahi? Are you okay or not? And can we do something? Don't worry if there are medicines, we'll get it to you. Don't worry if there's a food problem, we'll get it to you. So some very beautiful examples of how this collaboration happened across all these parties. At the district administration level, yes. This is Mr. Deepak Singla, who is the district magistrate of Gadchiroli. He didn't know what to do, but the targeting of senior citizens he knew is very critical because he doesn't have enough facilities in his public hospitals. In case it becomes a pandemic in Gadchiroli, he can't service. So the only way was prevention. And within prevention also, like Srinivas said, the key is the last 5% who are going to need ICU. So how do you prevent it for those with comorbidities? Yes. Similarly, the nodal officer, this is someone from typically the social welfare department or the social justice department. We had one in each district. They were the nodal officers who were responsible for all the coordination at the district level. So this was really a program that was run by government more than even by us, because these are the two key things, but it shows a great example of government and NGO participation and Niti Aayog all coming together across the thing. This is a lady from Ramanathapuram who really worked hard. The mother NGOs who are part of this. So again, we asked the collector who are constructive NGOs. There's a beautiful example of Mr. Afzal Mir from Jammu and Kashmir. So north, south, east, west, we had people all the way from Mizoram to Jaisalmer and from Kupwara in Jammu and Kashmir to Rameshwaram, literally across the country. And these non-profits are typically very strong community relations. So they know the panchayat, they know the local population, they have links, they have local volunteers, they have respect in the local community. So their ability to reach out, but they didn't know what needed to be done. How do you get the data of the senior citizens? How do you get access to the district collectorate office? How do you resolve their problem? That was their constraint. So that is what came in. So you're leveraging the best of each side. The local NGO had certain skills. The Ministry of Social Justice, in fact, has expanded this program to include any provision that was required was provided free for these people. If the pension was not paid, it was first paid to these people. And so Afzal would be responsible for making sure that that happened with the Social Justice Department. And the final and probably the most interesting portion was the Apne Sathi themselves. These were volunteers, young people like Satnam Kaur from Punjab. Right. And the beauty that happened was, these people, there are so many young people in India who want to do something about this, but don't know what they could do except contributing money. But here it gave them a sense of purpose. Your own dada, dadi, your own grandfather, grandmother, for those who are not Hindi speaking, it's grandfather, grandmother campaign. So for them itself, it was like reaching out to your own grandparents and taking care of them. You had to think of it like that. Yes. Thank you. Next, please. And so essentially, just to give you a few examples, we've reached out in the last 150 days to over 2 million citizens one-on-one and over 43,000 grievances. This means a small thing like my ration card was burnt, and so I didn't have a ration card, like Birendra Rai ji from Bihar. And so therefore he couldn't get his ration. And therefore, if you see him as it is, he looks, poor man is not in the fittest of health. If he didn't get his ration, the chances of his being a morbid case is very, very high. Similarly, another case from Assam, where an old lady didn't have her medicine, but we just ensured that she got the medicine. So over 43,000 grievances were resolved, and hopefully this has reduced the morbidity in these cases. So an extremely enriching program for communities, for volunteers, for government, and a great example of collaboration to make this happen across the country. I'll be happy to handle questions, but Divya, back to you.
So much, Saditya, for this presentation. I think one big part of the pandemic has been how unfair it's been on the elderly, and this is something which is not just about from the disease perspective, but also from the socioeconomic perspective. And it's interesting to see this kind of an intervention that's happening. We'll come back to you after this the panelists finish their presentation. Now, I want to introduce you to Ms. Preeti. Ms. Kibe is Senior Manager CSR, Forbes Marshall. She spent 12 years of her career in pharmaceutical marketing before she moved to the social development sector. She made her foray into the social development sector with Dr. Reddy's Foundation and then with Confederation of Indian Industry, where she formed and coordinated the CSR panel. Ms. Kibe, I don't want to take much time. The floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Divya. Good morning and good evening to all of you. Today I'll be presenting the Forbes Marshall Group's response to COVID. Next slide, please. Just a brief about the company. We are a company with a proud heritage of 70+ years and a global presence of 30+ offices. Next slide, please. The purpose and values, the purpose of our company is energizing businesses and communities worldwide. Why this is important, you'll come to know in the slides preceding these ones. And integrity, family, spirit, excellence, and good citizenships are our values. Next slide, please. Energizing communities, we have always believed in the philosophy of contributing and giving back to the community that we operate in. So today my presentation is also going to focus on what we have done for the communities around us. Our main social initiatives are in the fields of education, health, and women empowerment. Next slide, please. A few pictures of what we exactly do. Next slide. Yes, next slide, please. So the Forbes Marshall response was in 4 buckets really: safety at work, protecting incomes, medical facilities, and support for the community and unserved sections of society. So where, earlier slide please. Yeah, safety at work, the first response, our first actions were to secure our own immediate circle. Immediate circle meaning our members, our employees, people who are dependent on us, and our community. Protecting incomes not only of the members, we call our employees members, protecting incomes not only of our members, but also of the staff who are dependent on us, the vendors, the facilities, the conservancy staff, the gardeners. So this was again one of our major responses. Medical facilities, we have a 30-bedded hospital within our campus, but in addition to that, 2 core teams were formed to facilitate, to help our members who were COVID positive or who were suspected cases of COVID positive, and then they were given guidance and referrals as they needed. The main part, the support for the community and the unserved sections of societies, will be in the preceding slides. Next slide, please. We have built a special isolation center with the approval of the PCMC, that is the Pimpri-Chinchwad Municipal Corporation, in our own facility at Pimpri. This is specifically for our members who are mildly symptomatic or positive, but do not have a facility for home quarantine. Here, we have provided complete care as well as medical supervision. The isolation rooms are self-sufficient with attached washrooms, tables, and also the monitoring equipments like oxygen monitoring thermometers and oxygen cylinders are placed in the common area. Next slide. Coming to the communities, it really required an immediate response. The first response was food, donation of food and the materials which they needed to sustain. And we work in the tribal areas, around 30 villages in Chakan area, MIDC Chakan. So immediately our response was in those areas where we donated PPE kits to the Kher Panchayat Samiti and the KM Hospital, and ration kits were donated to stakeholders in our community. We also are a part of a juvenile diabetic clinic project in Jahangir Hospital where we facilitated a donation of ration kits there, and tribal migrant labor in Nanded. Around 250 tribal migrant labor were stranded in Nanded, and they needed some ration kits. Next slide, please. Even international branches helped out in the donation of the ration kits. An example of our Sharjah branch. Next slide, please. Our R&D department has innovatively, come up with a hydroclean disinfectant for floor cleaning, and it came at the right time. This innovation. So we donated over 3,000 liters of this Swissney water, that is branded the disinfectant water, which is a surface cleaning solution, to all those who needed it. The corporations were given, the DCP offices were given. Like I mentioned, the Panchayat Samitis, the hospitals under the Panchayat Samitis, the primary healthcare centers under them were given this solution. We have also donated one machine that generates this solution to KM Hospital in Pune, because that was one of the prime hospitals which was catering to COVID patients and needed this. Next slide, please. Income generation support to our ladies. Like we saw women's empowerment is one of our major focus areas. So till such time our ladies had not geared up to make this mask, and we trained them to make this mask. We also looked at local NGOs. We supported other local NGOs by purchasing the mask which we needed internally for also our factory members, and we gave them orders of hospital gowns and aprons. In addition to that, our ladies were trained in stitching these masks, and income generation opportunity to our community ladies were given by stitching around 10,000 cloth masks so till date. And you'll agree that this number is increasing day by day. In fact, our own employees are giving them orders for their families, for friends. Next slide, please. We were part of the Sharad Bhojan Yojana. This was linking the public distribution system, that's a ration, what we call it, to the migrants in rural part of the Pune district. This scheme was launched by the CEO of the Pune Zilla Parishad, where Forbes Marshall procured grains, that is wheat and rice primarily, from Food Corporation of India. Around 86 metric tons of rice and 3 metric tons of wheat were procured, and this served around over 30,000 individuals. Our team went to the place in the to inspect the grains, the quality of the grains which was donated. Next slide, please. Forbes Marshall, in our Kasarwadi plant, we prepared 20,000 meals for migrants in the nearby area. This initiative was launched by PCMC, and they requested our support. And here a cross-functional team was created. And in this team, even the ladies of our community helped out in packing the material, and then the distribution was done to the migrants in the nearby areas. Next slide, please. This, I believe, is very important because including the community, building the resilience of the social sector, our NGO partners and the other smaller NGOs who are not able to cope up. I think the smaller NGOs are also at risk because of this pandemic. So Forbes Marshall organized 2 webinar series, Resilience in the Time of Crisis, for small to medium-sized NGOs. And the topics were program redesign and financial management. And this was very well appreciated. And here, not only our NGOs, but the other NGOs whom we felt would benefit from such a session were also invited. Forbes Marshall also supported Help for Children in Need Foundation, which has been working during the pandemic, particularly with youth and children. And they also addressed the issues of isolation, depression, hunger, and many such issues related to the pandemic. In addition, we have supported several small enterprises in different ways, like giving advance orders for our Chakan plant. They are very small companies and vendors which are associated with our regular manufacturing facilities. So I feel they also become part of the family, and during the COVID pandemic, they were also affected adversely. So to protect them, these things were also done. We provided financial as well as space support to Copper Enterprises. I'm not sure if Copper Enterprises is a enterprise which deals with the tambat, that is the copper, the people who make articles of copper. We call them tambat in Marathi. So they work with these indigenous copper artists, and they support them by preparing artifacts made from copper. So we provided financial as well as space support to Copper Enterprises and gave them advance orders. Next slide, please. Everyone speaks about the issue, the pandemic had the effect on the migrants, right? So Forbes Marshall is part of the Migrant Resilience Collaborative. We call it the MRC. It's an active member. The MRC is a multi-stakeholder collaborative of non-profit, philanthropic and private sector. This is basically to ensure the safe and responsible recovery of migrant families. Initially migrants, the support needed was ration kits, facilitating their transport immediately to their places or wherever. If they've stayed back how to make their life easier if they've stayed back in the areas where they work. But in the long term, we need to build their resilience. So this collaborative will support 10 million migrant workers and their families in the coming 3 years. And Mrs. Rati Forbes, our director, is a member of the steering committee. Next slide, please. Another such initiative, a collaborative initiative we are part of, is the Social Compact. We all agree that there's an urgent need to provide basic equity and dignity to informal migrant workers. So around 140 million migrant workers have been adversely affected because of this. And Forbes Marshall is one of the first companies to sign up for this business civil society initiative. This work has kickstarted in Pune, Ahmedabad, and Mumbai. Next slide, please. Volunteering skills, everyone will agree that now digital empowerment has also become one of the major challenges post the pandemic. So on ground support was provided by our volunteers in giving these ration kits and Srisni water, and virtual volunteering to our stakeholders. Next slide, please. The newspaper coverage of our initiatives. Next slide. Conclusion, I feel our interventions have reaffirmed the faith of our employees that they work in a safe environment, and our outreach mitigates some of the challenges of the community and the migrant workers. In conclusion, I feel our response to COVID-19 continues to evolve along with the situation, and we will continue to support our community and come out of this pandemic stronger together. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Preeti. I think one of the biggest collateral damage of this pandemic has been the migrant crisis,
yes.
A very unique issue specifically to India. So we'll come back, to you again on how exactly you managed to sort of handle that crisis. But now I want to go to our next panelist who'll be patiently waiting all this while, Mr. Gaurav Arora. Mr. Arora, thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Arora is Vice President, Project Skills and Sports at Salaam Bombay Foundation, and has been associated with the skill development ecosystem since the inception of the national mission in 2009. He brings 16 plus years of experience in the corporate and development sectors to his role at Salaam Bombay Foundation. Mr. Arora is also visiting faculty at Narsingh Monjee Institute of Management Studies, Mumbai, where he teaches corporate social responsibility and marketing management courses. Mr. Arora, I don't want to take much of your time. The floor is yours. Please take us through the initiatives that you worked on during the pandemic.
Thank you so much, Divya, and the Center for inviting Salaam Bombay Foundation to share their experiences. So, I'll talk about, basically our mission and vision a little later. We are an organization which works with adolescents in 5 cities, and, these are primarily school-going adolescents. Especially when you are based out of a city like Mumbai, and, Divya, you pointed out about the migrant issue, right? So all of us are aware that, when the lockdown was announced, so many migrants were stuck in the city. And I think everyone at that point in time, whether it was the government or the local corporation, NGOs, basically individuals, I think everyone was trying to be a good Samaritan and make sure that, the food relief effort, particularly for these migrants, were catered to. So, basically as a development sector organization, I think initially our, first and foremost, what we did was support, basically corporates and governments in actually making sure that the meals or, food is actually able to reach out to the community. So, as an example, we tied hands with IRCTC. They had a kitchen, in Bombay Central Station and CHT station in Mumbai. So we helped them kind of, basically pick up through our volunteers, meals and distribute it to the community. Similarly, basically 2 or 3 corporate donors came on board and we facilitated their grocery distribution initiative. But I think, as I said, many good Samaritans were doing all of that. But I think there was one underlying issue. The underlying issue was the fact that, for a city like Mumbai, which has got so many wards, the demand and supply has to be brought on a common platform, right? How do you know, basically which wards have more number of migrant population? How, as a supplier, you need to ensure that, basically the food needs are served, as a priority to those wards where, basically a large number of migrants are based. So that's where, basically we approached BMC and we said that, this is an issue and Salaam Bombay Foundation would want to work as a project management unit to kind of, help solve this issue. So, essentially what we're talking about is the aggregator model, right? So we reached out to Ola, Uber, and a couple of aggregators. And finally, we were able to bring in Zomato, who agreed to lend their technological platform for doing this. So, you see screenshots of some app, on the left-hand side. So essentially, it's a closed app where there are food suppliers or grocery suppliers. On a Zomato app, you can replace a restaurant with a supplier of essential services. Okay, and you can replace a customer with a basically a NGO or a community volunteer who want to seek and then distribute it to the community. So then what you're essentially doing is you're connecting the supplier and the seeker on a real-time basis through the means of this particular app. So you can see on the app that one seeker organization would go and open Zomato. They would click on the project link, and then depending upon where your area is, basically all these suppliers would list down. They would have different kitchens, and then from wherever you want to seek this supply, you kind of order fixed number of meals or fixed number of basically grocery, and then basically the need would be met. Okay, so what we were able to do through this platform is basically bring the demand and supply of the city on a common aggregator platform. So we were able to we ran it for a period of around 30 days or so. We could bring in 8 big supplier organizations and 27 seeker NGOs. Around 2.25 lakh cooked meals and over 18,000 ration kits were distributed through this. We were also part of Milker from Mumbai initiative. This was an NGO cooperative, and I think one of the things basically again the fact that how do you really track as far as groceries are concerned, right? So how do you ensure that a single family only receive it once? So how do you stop duplication? So through Milker again, where we are a part of, we are trying to make sure basically that there is an Aadhaar-based OTP mechanism. So once the beneficiary receives it, it's kind of put over there, and hence it is booked. Next slide, please. Okay, so in addition to food initiatives, we also participated in a project called Khaki Project. This ran, basically in support of the Access, Diana Fenty and Salam Mumbai Foundation. So we were able to distribute sanitizers and goggles, safety goggles to police professionals in Mumbai. And then finally, our own beneficiary base, as I mentioned, the students, right? Primarily from the slums of Mumbai. And you can imagine, basically they living in their 6x8, basically shanties or homes. And you can imagine, when lockdown was announced, how would they respond? The whole mental health of, basically people from this particular socioeconomic strata. So, basically what we started was something called as Happy Mind Calls, reach out to them, play a simple game, Katta Papad, Pakka Papad, or get their family members involved. So idea was to really, seek their mental health well-being and really, basically connect to them in that fashion. And finally, of course, tie up with Radio Mirchi, gang. So 71 of our students, basically came on Radio Mirchi, and they were able to kind of, share about their problems, their own communities related to health or, food or water, etc. Next slide, please. Okay. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, very quickly on what our vision and mission, we work with adolescents, school going, and our mission is to engage at-risk adolescents through in-school leadership programs. So we have a range of kind of, program. We are essentially a school-based model, right from preventive health, nutrition and, tobacco control leadership. And we also have a lot of academies that run in the school. So, because of the paucity of time, I'm going to focus on one academy, which is School Set School program, and how we did a digital adaptation or transformation of the entire model. Next slide, please. So if I have to communicate in one slide, basically this is our model. We integrate skills in secondary education, and then after that we provide some kind of continuum in form of internships. The idea is provide soft skills and technical skills when children are in the school and college, when adolescents are in the schools and colleges, so that at the age of 18 years, basically they kind of are good enough to enter the employable workforce. From day one, our model is very portable. So basically we call it skills in a bag model. So basically the bag has all the technical equipment that need to train adolescents, and it moves from one school to another school. So there's a lot of scalability because we work with corporate government bodies, so so on and so forth. And of course, it's not a capital intensive model, so it is basically there's a lot of cost effectiveness which is coming from there. Next slide, please. So, as I said, this was essentially a school-based model. And when COVID happened, basically schools are shut down. So there's practically no way to kind of, bring these adolescents to school to train them, right? So I think the first and foremost thing that we really did was, basically find out how many of them had access to mobile phones. I think the issue was to really not solve the initial problem by saying, no one has a mobile phone, but can you really build a model for those who have a mobile phone? And if you have a model, then you can actually think about basically providing access to those who are not connected. So I think, we focus our energies on building a model. So we thought, basically we could facilitate, by providing these adolescents mobile recharge, basically, so that they have the desired internet bandwidth to connect. And then, basically there is a lot of effort, basically to help, bring them on Zoom and MS Teams and things like that. And once you're able to do it successfully, we were able to do a live training model around it, right? So, you can see in the photo, in the picture, that one of our trainers for beauty and wellness is actually connecting to a parlor. And these are adolescents from slums, their own homes are actually, connecting. And we also facilitated by providing them, basically material, home-based kit that was delivered at their home. So we were able to build a successful model, training model through which they were able to attend the live session. So, we call it digital model, digital inclusion, and hands-on experience, etc. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So between April to July, we kind of, piloted with 250 students. It worked very well for different kind of trades. And given the fact that we had a very good response to the pilot, we also saw, a lot of parental engagement. We also saw, basically family members coming and joining in. So, one of the pictures you can see, the mother of the girl, has joined in, and she is actually running through a financial literacy session on, basically a Tata Capital app. Similarly, we were able to provide, tablets and hence, digital inclusion to those who did not have an access to phone. And given the success of this pilot, this year we plan to train 3,500 adolescents in Mumbai and Pune through this model, and we are also rolling out these programs in Kolkata, Jaipur, and Bangalore. Last slide, please. Yeah, so quick, photos on how, basically Alisha Wagmare has been given material and she's joining classes. Another child who has been given a tablet. Basically parents who are joining in, and after the completion of the course, you can see the smiles on their faces. So these are 30-40 hours of intervention, basically training intervention which are given. Yeah. So thank you, Divya. That's it from my side.
Thank you so much, Mr. Arora. I think after the elderly, it's the children and young adults who have been hugely hit by lockdown and the after effects of the pandemic. Thank you so much for the session. So now we begin our interactive discussion. The Q&A is open for all the audiences who have joined us here. Please start putting your questions in the chat boxes. But I want to start with you, Mr. Srinivas. When you started off the training program, this was almost 8-9 months ago, when the entire medical community was completely startled on how to approach the pandemic. There were no treatment protocols. People were learning literally, on every patient. Now, 10 months down the line, after all the training session, what has been your biggest learnings, and how do you think we can sort of replicate it for other such crises?
There have been a lot of learnings for us as a team, which enabled this happen, connecting the the healthcare workforce of the country to these providers, trainers. I would say the biggest learning I had was that the virtual learning is here to stay. One is that we had always been under the impression that health is such a touch and feel kind of a thing, but there's about at least 70 to 80% of knowledge that can be codified and shared, and that can help people. And second is the kind of confidence that can be given through slight rigor in the way you expect a trainee to undergo a program. Although it was pandemic time, we did not dilute our standards. We kept pushing the trainees to take the full advantage. Third, of course, today in this virtual world, we are getting knowledge sources. WHO is continuously upgrading, and most of the great thing was a lot of knowledge was shared so freely with everybody. So I think the trend is here, and we can, as a country, when we really look at the skills deficit in our health workforce for a lot of issues, whether it is handling mother and child issues or geriatric issues or even a regular diabetes hypertension management, there is so much of these these skills that can be taught down the line, where it can actually get into the community. So I think there are some positives. Of course, this human misery is something which nobody can alleviate, but some of these positives that have come about because of this experience, I'm quite hopeful that we can carry it forward.
Right. How did you manage to find time to train the physicians? I think because people were working literally, over 24 hours. How did you kind of ensure that all of them came together at a single time?
No, so that's why it was staggered over almost 6 months. And it was more about the pull that we experienced from the hospitals themselves. That they felt the requirement for equipping themselves and their workforce. Nobody would want to lose their own doctors or nurses to this. So when they realized there is something like this, the All India Institute and a lot of institutions from the government have already done a good job, fairly good job in giving a lot of good modules, made it available. We only followed up with a dedicated workforce, and I should really thank about 200 of my colleagues worked across different project areas in 26 states to keep following up with all these trainees all through in the last 6 months. So that persistence, that connect always helped. The kind of credibility and trust also that we have developed over the years with other projects that helped a lot of people to believe that, okay. And then of course, CMC is such a big name in the academic field, and they did such a wonderful job. So also CARE Institute was very responsive. So we had to really increase the batch size from 40 at a time to almost 150 to now almost 250 at a time. So, and they have geared up themselves to get this going. So it's been a good experience. I think the doctors, thankfully, the fact that 1/4 of this entire trainee workforce was doctors also showed that they were keen on learning and equipping and giving that new knowledge to their own patients.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think there is a lot that, as you said, virtual learning is here to stay, and perhaps it becomes a model for future crises. So Aditi, now I want to come to you about your initiative on working with the elderly population. Perhaps you're one of the few organizations who have some sort of a data on what the elderly were going through during the pandemic. And this is not directly related to the disease per se, but the anxiety and the other issues which they were going through, like not getting medical care. Is there like a handbook, again, which something that we can take to the government and say that these were how the elderly population were hit, and not necessarily due to the disease directly, and there are some interventions. So can you give us some insights that you gained during this project?
Sure, Divya. So yes, I think the advantage of our program though is that because it's run with government and the NGO, whatever we were learning immediately was being implemented by the government. It wasn't like separately we are learning something, then we are trying to advocate for it, because the collector's office is running this initiative. The collector's office didn't realize that senior citizens was something to focus on. If you see in the early stages of the lockdown, they were very focused on, okay, providing the isolation centers, providing the quarantine center. And, like older citizens, why are you, irritating me type of thing. But slowly they realized, as soon as they got the basic stuff done, they realized, oh, this is the most critical community. And so the level of involvement was higher and higher. And at least 3-4 things seem to be happening as a result, right? Because there is also a nodal officer sitting at the collector's office from the Ministry of Social Justice, who's responsible for listening to the volunteers' queries and then forwarding it. Like if it's a ration card, it can't be solved by me. If it's a pension issue, it can't be solved by me, type of thing, right? So you had to forward it to the relevant thing and follow up and make sure that it got solved within 24 hours. That was sort of the instruction that was given. Otherwise, there's no point to try and solve it. Normally, you solve it after like 2 months, after 4 follow-ups. That's no use. So I think the government itself was learning very, very rapidly. So for example, now one of the things that's happening is several collectors have made a cell just for senior citizens to be able to call. And this is not just for COVID related. This is for their pension scheme. This is for the, any problems that they have medically. Some have created a separate line in hospitals for senior citizens in the district hospital, because you know that they just can't afford to wait for that long if they have an illness. You've created a separate line for the ration collection, because again, it's just too critical. You can't expect a 75-year-old to stand in the district. So I think the sensitivity within the government department for senior citizens has increased. Otherwise, Ministry of Social Justice didn't have the level of importance that it probably needed. This has actually helped generate that. When you're listening to the senior citizen directly, you realize that, oh God, this is really bad. And it reminds you of your own grandmother, right? A lot of collectors are young and they say, Dadi ma ko ye nahi hona chahiye, suljha do. It shouldn't happen to the grandmother, solve it immediately. So a lot of micro innovations like this have happened in different districts, including main thing I think is convergence. Have a single call center in which any old age person can call for all her problems. How is a little, an old senior citizen going to figure out that, acha, pension, I have to call this, I have to go there. For ration, I have to call this. If I have a medical issue, I have to call this. Just not going to happen. We have for corporates, we have a single window clearance for ensuring FDI. But for a senior citizen at a collector level, we don't have a single window. So I think that is what is happening.
Absolutely. Just a quick follow-up question, and if you could just be brief about this. You had to repurpose or completely change your program because of the pandemic. So do you think this intervention, working with the elderly population, is going to be one of the permanent features for Piramal Foundation?
We don't know. At the moment, we are just bothered about reducing.
Sure.
So we've been forced to get into this because it was the problem. The communities we serve needed it. So at the moment, we're just focused on making sure we reach every last citizen. In the districts that we started 150 days ago, we've reached 70% of the citizens, which is, I think, about the limit of what you can reach. So we will reach there and then we'll take the call. We're in very month-to-month planning at the moment. Do what the communities need.
Sure, great. I think that's a great insight for even the other not-for-profit working, where you sort of tailor your operation as the time goes in. I think that's what the pandemic has taught us, to think quick on our feet. Ms. Preeti, I want to come to you about to know more about your work with the migrants. This has again been one puzzle. We've been talking about COVID from the perspective of disease and treatments and vaccines, but the other impact, and this is again very unique to India, especially the migrant crisis which came in. Is this something, would you like to take us through what were the unique challenges that you faced while working with the migrants? And now, almost 8 months down the line, things seems to be sort of, all hunky-dory. We have got the numbers under control. But now as the migrants return back to their workplaces, how can we protect them? And how can we sort of ensure that we don't have a second exodus if things go bad in the future? You're on mute, Preeti.
Yeah, like I presented, mentioned in my presentation, there are two initiatives which we are with, the Migrant Resilience Group and the Social Compact. Both of them are dealing with migrants, but in the MRC, we are partnering with Janasahas, which in turn is partnering with 40 CSs and CBOs for COVID relief. Everyone will agree here that the short-term relief to migrants was provided, like you rightly mentioned, the ration kit, facilitating their travel home or wherever they wish to be. But one also realized that the migrants who stayed back and the government SOPs or the government, they could not leverage the government schemes because of the basic issues with their documentation. I think this is also where one has to work. So this collaborative, one is, and a company cannot do it alone. This has to be a collaborative effort, right from the migrants working in the companies as well as in the construction industry. So it was done mostly in 2 to 3 ways. The short term, like I mentioned, relief was food, the COVID hygiene, transport, and the emergency cash, which had to be given. And the medium and the long term needs are going to be resilience building, the systemic changes which have to take place, the social security, like I mentioned, incomes, the livelihoods, and protection of rights. I think this is one area which is going to be a very long-term area we have to work in. And where the social compact is concerned, again, we are working in the for a common minimum undertaking. In the common minimum undertaking, it will also include the humane working conditions for all. So it is not just related to the COVID pandemic. I believe the COVID pandemic has open a lot of issues that the migrants are facing. COVID is one of them, but because of this, it's thrown up a lot of issues. So the social compact is also working across these three sectors. The first section, like I mentioned, is a common minimum set of undertakings, which across industries will have to work for it. Then the second section will be additional good practices with an industry focused lens. I think companies will have to consider this when they are planning their work strategies. And the third section will include parameters that outline gold standard working conditions across the industries. So these three will have to be taken care of in these two collaborators which are working. And working for migrants will have to be on a scale and on a collaborative effort.
Right. Thank you so much for that insight. There is, of course, an audience question also, and quite an interesting one. Some of them have already been answered by the panelists, so thank you so much for that. But there's one question for you, Mr. Arora, from our audience, is that how is Salam Bombay Foundation monitoring the skills that is learned through the online model? How can they use it in the future? Is there a focus on practicing the skills so that they don't forget the same?
Sure. I think that's a great question. So, as a part of our model, basically, I mentioned that how we are providing home-based practice kits. So whether it is beauty and wellness or home appliance repair or mobile repair. So it's not just a live theoretical session which is happening. It is complemented by a home-based kit. And very interestingly, in the first phase of lockdown, we had 90, adolescents who had actually gone to their villages in UP, Bihar, Andhra, Jharkhand, and so on and so forth. And basically we did make use of courier services and speed post and got the kits also delivered there. So very interestingly, even from their natives, they were able to join. So one, the live session, and which is complemented by home-based kit. So that's one part of it. And second, not for all the skills, but for some of the skills we were able to think a little out of box, and we were able to facilitate internships. For example, telecalling as an opportunity, right? And I think during the entire pandemic phase, where business were not allowed to open, but still products and services are being sold. So telecalling, whether it is education industry or a lot of other industries, actually became an opportunity. So we were able to facilitate, for example, your conversation English skills or retail skills which are earlier used basically in a mall. But today you are using same kind of skills, by making use of telecalling as an opportunity. So those were few things. I think we have to think a little out of box, and we were able to facilitate that.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Gaurav, for that. We have roughly around 8 minutes left before we end the panel, and there is an interesting question from our audience here, and this is something which I think all the panelists should take in, that why has it taken a pandemic to develop these unique outreach and excellent solutions to civic problems? I mean, these are always around, but it took a pandemic to for all of us to kind of think out of box. Can we expect some of these initiatives to continue in the longer term for better quality of life for all the sections of the society? And I want to start with you, Srinivas. What do you think? Why did it take so long? And do you think this is going to continue?
I think this is a culmination. If you really look at e-commerce has been there, banking has been more or less on virtual platforms, education, we have had virtual classes. Probably it was confined to those who were privileged and those who were probably able to access. You should also, we should also see that the communication network has developed only in the last 5 years with the 4G and the 5G. So those sectors which are able to really latch on to that and convert their offerings into virtual offerings have actually done so. And so this is a great learning, I think, what we already had. And I suppose there's a lot more that can be done virtually. Ultimately, the thing can, what we today still face a little bit of resistance because we are also used to touch and feel and brick and mortar. But, change is something which is thrust upon us. We need to adapt to this. And I'm sure a lot more services, especially in healthcare. I'm glad the government has actually taken a huge step announcing the National Digital Health Mission. Telemedicine has been around for 25 years. It took a pandemic to government to actually give the guidelines in the middle of this. So I think some of these are positives, and this momentum, I suppose, will go on. We just need to develop these models and then provide workable models, proof of concepts to the government. I mean, not just the government, a lot more institutions.
Sure, great. Thank you so much. Ms. Aditya, what's your view? Why did it take a pandemic for you to think about, and not you alone, but of course, that there is this elderly population who does need all sorts of support and not just medical support?
I tend to agree with Mr. Srinivas. I think there have been certain things that are happening. I wouldn't say it's only the pandemic that's brought this whole thing together. Certain things have been happening before. Would you have imagined the Swachh Bharat mission? It didn't take a pandemic to cause suddenly for toilets to come up in India for 5 years, right? If the pandemic had not happened, Jal Jeevan mission would have happened and we would be having running water in a lot of villages than we have today. So there have been huge thrusts in particular directions. Ayushman Bharat, which is connecting private and government hospitals to ensure that there is an insurance for provision of things. So many things have happened in the last 5 to 10 years, despite the pandemic. So first, I think we should question whether it's only because of the pandemic that these things are happening. I think the pandemic has focused to make sure certain particular things happen, which are even more important. And I think two things I find which have happened. One is government to NGO collaboration, and two is NGO to NGO collaboration, and three is government to government collaboration. All three are much stronger because now there's a common enemy. In Mumbai Indians plays Delhi Daredevils, we are on different sides. But when India plays Pakistan in cricket, we are on the same side. This is like that. So the coronavirus provided a common sort of thing for all of us to fight. So the previously Ministry of Social Justice, if it wrote to Ministry of Education, there'll be time to respond. Now you knew that there's no choice. You had to do it fast. Similarly, the non-profit might have been advocating against the government. So even your question, can we take something to government? There's no time to take a paper to government. You just have to work together and start solving the problem. So the NGO to government is also stronger. And even NGOs collaborating, we used to hold conferences. Now there's no need. Fast, start solving the problem. So I think all collaborations are just much, much faster. Preeti already spoke about social compact and migrant resilience. I think to just collaborate is just inevitable now. So I think collaboration as a mindset, I think that is what the pandemic has probably precipitated. Previously, we might have been able to work in our silos. There's no choice now.
Right. Preeti, you mentioned about the rights of the migrants. This has always been existing, but it was just during the pandemic and during the lockdown that we realized that what a big roadblock it is to access services. Again, for your organization, is this something that's going to be one big part of the work that you will be working on?
Like I mentioned, for both these things, we are going to be working in a collaborative. I agree with Mr. Srinivas and Mr. Aditya Nataraj about the pandemic, why it really opened our eyes. I think everything was there existing. The scale with which it has come up, I think that is the difference. Number one is that, and number two, other than these, we will continue working with the migrants, and being part of a collaborative is very important, and we cannot work in silos, especially for an issue of the scale of the migrant workers. But starting with our own immediate communities and our immediate stakeholders, I feel building up their capacities and resilience is one of the major challenges, and I think we should focus on that also, because the post-COVID-19 objective should also include systemic change. The systemic change has to come in the mind, build capacities of all the stakeholders involved. And then slowly we'll be able to really work towards what we want. And like I mentioned, have to be short-term and long-term. And migrant working in collaboratives and not competing with each other, but complementing each other. We've already begun that in the areas where we are working. We are working in fact, not only for the COVID-19, but I feel working in collaboratives will be here to stay. For an education initiative in Khed Taluka, we are forming a Khed collective with a lot of industry and trust NGO foundation support. With the government, of course, government is a major player in that. So I feel going ahead, working in collaboratives will be a major change that this pandemic is brought about.
Absolutely. So, Mr. Gaurav, are you here? I mean, you have in the panel here, you have you have the audience and also, great collaborators. Would you see that, do you sort of anticipate that you can take your training skills, which you sort of imparted through this time, to, let's say, an initiative in folks? Is that something that there is a scope for?
Sure. I think there were two things. One, from our experience, I do believe that a lot of solutions were there. What Devas and Asya and everyone is talking about. But I think the key is customization, and I think that's very, very important word. That how do you customize that solution which was there pre-pandemic? Okay, in post-pandemic you are able to, because the scale has increased. You never thought about taking digital education or digital skills, or any format, basically to people who are residing in 6x8 household in slums, right? So I think that the audience, the customer is changing, right? So without customization, I don't think basically you'll see a penetration. So I think what one needs to do is take the learnings basically of your customization, and maybe you'll have to re-engineer your solution so that you're able to kind of meet the needs of a larger community. So that's one. I think second point that I want to make is that I think this is the opportunity for our country for digital inclusion. I think we have been talking about this whole issue of internet penetration, mobile phone penetration. And we are seeing, of course, it is. But did we really kind of think before that it is going to happen? I think COVID has really pushed all of us to think out of box and make sure that basically we can look at these solutions. And I think in a way we are actually preparing a lot of our younger generation, right, adolescents, for the future by doing all of that. So if a 10th grader in a slum joins on Zoom and able to kind of take a learning, you can imagine that now this particular youth is capable of doing a lot of things, right? So in a way, we are also preparing them for the future. And we at Salam Mumbai Foundation believe that this initiative should stay and continue and actually go from there.
Right, that's great. We have still a couple of minutes to take a question, and there's one specific question for you, Mr. Aditya, that you might have very good data on the the morbidities that you might have prevented in the geriatric population through your initiatives. It would be, this data, if you can put it out, I think this is more of a thought that whenever you put out that data, that would be a great marker to understand the health impact on the elderly population. So any plans for you to do that?
Yes, government is tracking these 100 districts, and we are seeing that infection rates in senior citizens are at least 1.2 to 2% lower than in other districts, right? And that's a huge, and therefore morbidity will be much less. So I think that's a huge difference that we'll see. That's already true. And I think over the next 12 months that will happen. So this data is also constantly moving.
Right. So I think it's interesting that when all these things kind of is put on the public domain, it is going to be a huge thing for the science. One thing which we have all learned, I think also through this panel today, is that the big role that not-for-profit organizations play in helping governments in India, especially in India, where there are areas where services do not reach. And that's where you see the not-for-profit entering in, where the government has not been able to function for several reasons. This is, again, a last closing word, which I want from all the panelists, is that how do you think the government can support not-for-profit organizations so that they can continue doing the work which they're doing? I know there is the whole CSR, percentage spent and things like that, but any specific thing that you think that should be sort of going to the government? Mr. Srinivas, we'll start with you. A quick one word or one sentence answer.
I'm struggling actually to understand while we have praised the great role NGOs have played during these last few months, I think there is a slight disquiet in the NGO community. I think that needs to be addressed pretty quickly, especially where foreign funding is concerned. That's really put a lot of brakes on a lot of people's plans.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe that needs to be really relooked at expeditiously, and people should be taken on board.
No, that's a great point. I think that's a very important point, the FCRA issue, which has been going on for quite some time. And I think there is sort of, would the other panelists agree with that? Is that something that is Because we have like literally, I think now 50 seconds. Aditya?
So I think it's not just that issue, but overall, I think the government has realized that the community outreach is very, very critical. So government is trying to find new formats. If you see, there's much more public-private partnership in India today. I gave you the example of Ayushman Bharat. You wouldn't have imagined that, you know, you could have something like Ayushman Bharat where I, as a poor villager, could go to a private hospital and get as much service. I think you'll see the National Digital Health Mission is going to bring in technology, which is again from private sector players. Insurance, which is coming in. So I think it is inevitable. The level of cooperation will not be just with NGOs, but also the private sector. And there's going to be a lot of churn in government, NGO, and corporate coming together to solve social problems.
Great. I think thank you so much for all of you for joining us today for an insightful session. And there is a lot of learning that all of us are going to take back from today. Thank you so much once again.